Yo, Skunk Fam. This is a long-awaited episode with Joe Pietri, author of The King of Nepal, The 15-Ounce Pound, and he's also in some other documentaries and things like that. Today, we're sitting down to talk about the Sam the Skunk Man GW Pharmaceuticals controversy concerning Skunk One and the other hybrids. So without any further ado, how you doing, Joe?
I'm doing good, doing good.
Glad to have you with us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hi, Joe. Thank you for coming on the show, by the way. Nice to meet you.
Are you from England?
Yeah.
Oh, good, good, good. Okay, can we start?
We're recording.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. The first time that anybody really heard of the Skunk Man was when he went to Amsterdam. He went to Amsterdam and told people that he had jumped bail on a grow bust in Santa Cruz, and that he had escaped and he had thrown his seeds, his sacred seeds, into a dumpster. And then after he was released, he went to the dumpster, got those seeds, and then went to Amsterdam and created himself as the Skunk Man. We've had that checked. He's never been arrested for a grow bust. That's all bullshit. And at the time, Steve Hager was the editor for High Times. He came from he wrote some articles. I think he worked for some other newspapers, and he came to work at High Times. And basically, he was a newbie. He didn't know any smugglers. He never really dealt pot, and he didn't know how to grow. He's never grown or any of that other stuff. But he was named editor of High Times. When he went to High Times, he was introduced to the Skunk Man and Robert Connolly Clark and Rosenthal and Mel Frank, and they talked to him about having a California-style pot festival in Amsterdam. And from that conversation, Hager went on to create the Cannabis Cup in Amsterdam. The Cannabis Cup in Amsterdam was an intelligence gathering event. Okay. Skunk Man, Robert Connolly Clark, finally, after here for the past 10 or 15 years, or now 20 years, those guys have been calling me a rat, a DEA agent, a CIA agent, all this other stuff to try to besmirch my character, when actually they were the police. They were sheep-dipped into the Amsterdam scene, because that's what happened when they shut down the old school marijuana network. I need to talk about that a minute. People always ask me, how come we're not buying the great stuff from you? How come we're not getting that hash anymore? Well, we had the old school boy marijuana network. Like in my groups, I went to high school. I went to some people I went to kindergarten with. We'd known each other our whole lives. It was really hard to infiltrate our groups because we only did business amongst ourselves. But when Reagan became the president, right, he let the police sell weed and get high. And that, because they got high and sold weed, people trusted them. You trust somebody who came in to sell you 1,000 pounds, and he sold you 1,000 great pounds, and you sold them, and everything worked out good. And then all of a sudden, he becomes a buyer, and that's when they started to bust people under the RICO Act. And that's the same thing with Skunk Man. How he got to infiltrate the Dutch scene, because they were allowed to get high. The Robert Connolly Clark wrote a book on hashish. When he thanked Carlton Turner for helping him write the book, because he got to go to the University of Mississippi medical program. At that time, they had a medical scene, and you could get a medical license. He went there to do research, so he thanked Carlton Turner in his book Hashish. Carlton Turner went on to become Reagan's first drug czar. They've had those connections. The Skunk Man, Connolly Clark, all those people have had that connection since those times. Okay, so in Amsterdam, he appeared in Amsterdam with seeds, and basically he started writing dossiers on anybody and everybody who had anything to do with the cannabis industry. A few indoor greenhouses were arrested, stopped. Even his own greenhouse was stopped. He was the only one that didn't get busted. He went to Belgium or something and hid out when all the busts went down, so he could go back. Look, they even shut down my bus, my greenhouse. But actually, he was the one giving the information for the greenhouses to go down. Now, this guy is supposed to be wanted for a grow bust in California, and no other person was recommended higher than by the DEA than the Skunkman, David Watson, to have the first medical license to produce medical seeds of medical quality in Amsterdam before accredited universities and accredited PhDs. Well, 1 minute. I thought he was wanted in California. Okay, so basically, after the, I got out of the drug war and in the 90s, and then really didn't look back until I wrote my book, and then my book was published in German. So I was in I went to Germany. I got feted in Germany at the Canna Business Fair. I was feted at Canna Trade in Switzerland. I was feted in London, where I met Mr. Nice. But actually, I go back with Mr. Nice way longer than when I first met him. But they started selling this type of seed called skunk number 1. Okay, let's get this one straight. Skunk number 1 ain't skunk. The skunk weed that we grew up with that was made famous, why he took that name, was a type of skunk weed that smelled like you've been sprayed by a skunk. So it was impossible to mask. It was a Afghani strain, and it was just the most outrageously strong weed, but it also smelled like a skunk. People loved it. I remember I took some to New York in the 80s, in the 70s, or yeah, in the 70s, in the late 70s. I took some to New York, and I couldn't believe it. I sold it for $1,600 a pound, $100 an ounce. Unheard of prices at the time. The only time you got really a superior weed was either Thai weed or the Hawaiian weed that they used to grow outdoors in Hawaii. The Hawaiian weed at the time used to go for $3.75 an ounce for as many ounces as you want to buy. They were selling it for $6,400 a pound in New York. Wow. I haven't seen anything on this scene that even comes close to that original Hawaiian weed. I haven't seen anything on this seed that comes close to the Thai that we used to get. That was wholesaling for over $2,000 a pound. In those days, Mexican weed was great weed, grown from the different states in Mexico. Chocolate weed, guava, all those flavors, guava, chocolate, mango, all those flavors came from Mexico. So that chocolate Thai was from Mexican seeds that were brought to Thailand and mixed with Thai seeds. So he started selling seeds. The one thing, he started a seed bank. I forget what the name of the seed bank. I think of it. What he called Sacred Seeds. The most of the strains that he made were selfed. They didn't come from original landrace strains. The reason our weed was so much better back in the day is it came from original landrace strains from Colombia, from Africa, from India, hash from Afghanistan, hash from Nepal, weed from Jamaica, hash from Jamaica, hash oil from Jamaica, hash oil, hash from Lebanon. You just couldn't touch it. You couldn't touch it. Why anybody would? Well, nowadays they process it with butane, and they have BHO. That's poisonous, addicting stuff. You don't need that stuff if you have the great hash. But anyway, he started making a name of himself and started selling this variety of skunk number one. Skunk number one is supposedly a strain that's a Colombian, Mexican, and Afghani mix, right? But that's not really what it was. What it was the original jump off strain that they took and they bred along. They bred with every different strain from around the world to mix it with skunk, so that in one day they can claim the medical efficacy of those strains coming from their strain and not the original medical strains from Africa or from India that have been in Indian pharmacology for 6,000 years. So they tried to right away to mix everything up around the world. You go to Africa, you think you're buying some great weed, you have a DNA sequenced and there's skunk in it. What they call skunk. What they call skunk ain't skunk. I spoke to Philo's Bioscience, Nishan, and I said to him, why did you start it off with skunk? There's no such thing. That's not skunk. He says, well, we had to start it from somewhere. I said, well, why did you start it from that? You're making a guy who's obviously the police famous for something that's not really his. But that's what they did. But as time would tell, they found some ship ballast in a museum in Boston, because they used to use blocked presses of weed for weight on the boat for ballast. So they had a ballast bale there, and they took a sample of the bale, and it had skunk in it. And then I went to Philo's Bioscience, a scientist, top scientist. I said, you see, you're a top scientist, but I know more about weed than you, because I knew that was Afghani. That's not related to skunk. And you've made this guy famous over all the bullshit that he's created in Amsterdam. But see, the Dutch, they wanted to make cannabis like tulips. They've had 2 wars over tulips. You cannot buy a tulip anywhere in the world that doesn't come from Holland, or the buds, the bulbs don't come from Holland. So they wanted to do the same thing with cannabis. So if you go to the cannabis dynamics map, you'll see that it'll start from skunk number one, and then it'll lead out to every other strain that was created and mixed with that skunk number one, so that they can lay claim to it, of the genetics in the future. See, the drug war was a Ponzi scheme. Prior to 1940, you could have a prescription and go buy legal buds or legal hash or tinctures at the pharmacy if you had a prescription. Started in the early 20th century, and before that, it was always legal. But when the cannabis patents ran out, the Yale boys, the super educated people, forced it to be made illegal until the science could catch up. And when the science caught up, they made Mother Nature illegal, and they've been selling you chemical concocted copies ever since. The Skunkman was put in Amsterdam just basically for information gathering, and also he worked with Robert Connolly Clark, quantifying and qualifying where the loads were coming from. So they were actually working for the DEA. And it's funny because about last year, the Grow magazine, or the year before, Grow magazine came out with a story about cannabis genetics written by Robert Connolly Clark. In it, they said, well, let's get past this. It's true that scientists worked along with law enforcement to qualify and quantify where the strains were coming from. No, those guys were DEA scientists. Yeah, they were scientists, DEA scientists. Robert Connolly had power. He let's say you had the UN busted grow in Pakistan. They would send UN scientists there, get the genetic material samples out, and then burn the fields. Those samples would go to the Skunkman in Holland, and he would qualify. He would find out where they came from, what they were, what the DNA sequencing was. They did all that. So they were like 20 years, 25 years, 30 years ahead of what the scene is today. That's why you're saying, who are these people who are laying claim to all this? This has been in the game. This has been their plan since it was made illegal in the 1940, 1939. It's been in the game plan for them to find out the DNA sequencing for the different types of strains. You got to remember that cannabis was one of the most important medicines of all time. That Libby and Pfizer originally made their fortunes from cannabis-based and opium-based and cocaine-based medicines. And you go to Pfizer before it changed its name to Pfizer. It used to be Parker Davis. It's Parke Davis. If you go to Parker Davis and look at the factory that they had on the Detroit River, it was massive with vats as big as brewery vats to make their tinctures. Tinctures were the most popular medicines of all time and still will be. And so it was a huge industry. They imported millions and millions of pounds from Asia into the pharmaceutical companies in the States and the pharmaceutical companies in England, right? And it was a massive business. In 1910, the price of a pound. The price of a pound was like $1.10 to the pharmacies, $1.60 to the pharmacies. Okay. And then didn't get up to about $10 a pound until about around just before World War II. And then during the Depression, it only went up to about $6 a pound from the pharmacies. So that was your plan from the get-go. I mean, and right now you have, so Skunkman was right in the middle of all this. I wrote my book, The King of Nepal, and then I wrote a book, The King of Nepal, the Ice Wars edition, and I exposed him as a drug enforcement agent. He came to my booth in Amsterdam and threatened me, but I had this 6'8" Canadian guy with me, and those threats didn't go very far. But he said, he was upset because I had exposed him. And I looked at him, I said, well, don't you know after all these years that I know what the police looks like? That was the only conversation I've ever had with him. After that, he's been knocking me, had this guy, Todd McCormick, knocking me. I mean, imagine them calling me a DEA agent, man. I got a GED from high school. What, you know what I mean? I mean, I've been a smuggler. I've been selling weed since '63. And so I've been a real nemesis to them. I've been a real nemesis to the Dutch scene because I exposed them. They actually invited me to the Cannabis Castle, the Dutch scene. They promised to have my books published in all languages. They promised to have that I'd get endorsement deals, everything. I'd make money. Maybe they'd make a documentary if I would just sign on to their agreement that I would never expose what they were doing. So the Skunkman basically sold everybody out and sold all the information to the pharmaceutical company because he was working for them. He was working for them. So when Neville got busted in Australia, because Neville was wanted for seeds in America, they had busted his partner Kogo, and what happened to Kogo is that Neville made Kogo his fall guy. Right? When he made Neville his fall guy, Kogo picked up all the heat. Right? Of course, Neville's name came up. Neville was arrested going to Australia. He was Dutch. He had a Dutch citizenship and an Australian citizenship, and they arrested him. And when they arrested him, they had a report, a dossier on him, right, signed by Sam Selesny. Sam Selesny is a pseudonym for David Watson, the Skunkman. So the Skunkman was writing dossiers on anybody who and everybody involved in cannabis in Amsterdam. You know, if you bought something in Amsterdam, your name might have been on a mailing list that was sold to the American government. The Dutch was the worst thing that ever happened to cannabis after Prohibition. They fucked
Definitely.
everything up genetically and everything. But Watson now is working for a pharmaceutical company. You know,
Is
so
that
it's
GW?
yeah. Well, no, they sold
To Jazz.
they sold their seed bank to GW Pharmaceuticals and owned about 10% of GW Pharmaceuticals. The reason I know about that is because my friend created the ice water method, and GW came up to them at that cup and offered them $1.5 million for the recipe. And my friend didn't sell it to them. He was an idiot. He should have at least taken the meeting. But he wanted to give it to the people, so they gave it to the people. But what they did, Mila and them did, is reinvent it into bubble bags, Mila's bags. Well, when you use those bags, you lose 30% of the terpenes and cannabinoids because the bags are too porous. So you lose 30%. You never really make good hash. And so the bubble bags and all that, those were all scams made out of petrochemical products. The Dutch sit there with chemicals, with this, with that, trying to make whatever products that they can sell and promote to the American scene. Americans are thought of as dumb by Europeans, not as smart. So my friend Delp, he came out with a light deprivation, a little unit that you could put on your balcony in Europe and grow a little bit outdoors, right? And then when he came out with a bigger, more of a greenhouse type size, he wanted to come up with a name that would be familiar, that would be catchy with the American scene. So he came up with Light Dep. And so I said, why are you coming up with Light Dep? You know, why don't you just call it what it is, photoperiodic control, photoperiodism? He said, well, Americans won't understand it. You have to make it simple for Americans. And that's been the attitude in Europe, period. So Watson was involved in the whole scene, you know. Another thing about Watson is that let's see, at the turn of the 21st century, of 2020, like that, the Dutch scene was opening up, and the English scene was opening up medically, and the Rastas were selling stuff at their own, like, makeshift dispensaries on the street in Brixton, and GW Pharmaceuticals, or this was in the I forget, 20 something, 24, 20, 2005. The Dutch government, GW Pharmaceuticals, got paranoid that a California type scene was going to start in England. So they created a type of skunk weed that's like heroin. You know, people who use heroin one time, they only use it one time. They never go back. 100 people use heroin, only maybe one will get addicted because it's just so bad for you that most people get scared, right? They created a type of cannabis that was like, had that kind of effect. And all of a sudden you had the skunk psychosis and skunk this, and it leads to mental problems and all this kind of stuff, and all the bad publicity that came out on that skunk variety shut down that legal scene and brought it. They brought the classification back up to where it had been before. The one who created that variation was Skunkman from Hoder Farm. Hoder Farm is the medical facility that he created with the grace of the Drug Enforcement Agency. The Drug Enforcement Agency is basically an enforcement arm for the pharmaceutical companies. So Skunkman was planted undercover. He'd been undercover longer than Donnie Brasco. Man was undercover over 20 years. No one knew he was a cop till I exposed him. Oh, dude. And then he had another guy, a Gypsy Nirvana from International Canographic. That guy, when he's not a cop, he's police. Skunkman gave him free seeds that with every seed order that came out of his group, free skunk seeds would be given to them, and that was a way of them putting their genetics out around the world and mixing the genetics up with skunk, so that in the future they could lay claim for the genetic profile.
I got some of those free seeds that came with IC Mag orders sometimes, and they were always shit. I mean, like shit.
Yeah, well,
they grew, they germinated, but they were garbage.
Garbage, yeah. But you know about the skunk psychosis that went down in London, why they started to get down on skunk weed, and it never went towards legalization. Now they're talking about legalizing medically again. But for a while there, everybody thought that England was going to be like California. England has always been the biggest market outside of New York for weed. I mean, it's just been a big market. Still is. It still is.
Definitely.
They can't get enough weed in England. Now everybody's growing their own. So it's going to open back up there for sure. It's going to go open back up for sure all around Europe. But the funny thing is while they're opening up all around Europe, they're still fighting the drug war in places like Nepal, places like India, places like Afghanistan, people like Pakistan, where they're kicking down doors, busting people for weed or hash, and then burning down fields. So the drug war is still going on there while the drug war is ending here. It's a strange economics right there, especially from the country where Lord Shiva comes from, But the Skunkman was instrumental in that. He'd been undercover for over 20 years. He didn't get undercover until it started. He didn't leave Amsterdam until much later. And then he used to live in Amsterdam. I don't know if he still does. He may still live in Amsterdam.
I think he's still there as far as I know.
Yeah. But he's attached to a pharmaceutical outfit out of Canada. Now he thinks he's the granddaddy of marijuana. It's unbelievable that he's such an egotist.
Well, everything I've tried from him is garbage.
Everything he has is garbage. Everything he has is the whole Dutch scene. Their weed is garbage, dude.
It is.
The whole Dutch scene, weed is garbage. They're not important anymore. They lost that niche that they had. Everybody had to go to Amsterdam. Everybody had to go to Amsterdam and spend a lot of money. It was like a tourist destination for ganja.
Yeah,
that's not happening anymore. The tourist destination for ganja is California, Colorado, all these places that are legally can sell to anybody who has a license, who has not a license, who's over 21.
Well, anytime you went to Amsterdam, in around the 2000s and before that, any coffee shop you walked into, there'd be Americans there, tourists or whatever. Yeah. Now they don't need to leave America.
They don't need to leave America,
No.
So the Dutch scene was a terrible after Prohibition and making cannabis illegal, making Mother Nature illegal. Now they sell you chemical concocted copies. I got a book from Africa that shows all the medicinal plants that were collected and sold for the medical industries in Europe and in the States. It's amazing. They had that was a huge industry, the natural business industry prior to 1940. Now you go into a pharmacy, you never see a mortar and pestle. You used to go to a pharmacy, get a mortar and pestle. The guy would get different herbs, grind them up, and give it to you in a bindle. That's where bindles came from, by the way. But yeah, it's been the control of the elite, and when they couldn't control it anymore, they made it illegal, right? Until the science caught up to it. Now they're coming out with all these products, basically cannabis-based medicines.
Yeah.
They really dumbed down people, because before 1940, people would collect seeds, grow their own tomatoes, grow their own food. They were more agriculturally conscious. They're not that anymore. The
No.
only thing that have made them agriculturally conscious again is because everybody's growing their own medicine. That's been a big boon
Yeah.
for people, that to be able to grow their own medicine. But the skunk man, he was in on that scene all along. And I heard he had he's connected to the CIA. The CIA has been running the drug industry uh, uh, since it was created, because they use the money from the drug trade to finance their illegal activities around the world, because they can't go to Congress and get money to overthrow a government in Guatemala.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So they've been big. So there was one seed bank. It's called Reefer Man Seed Bank. He
Yeah. I
went
know
to
them.
work. He went to work with Robert Connolly, with Watson at his lab, and
Really?
all the guys who want to make a name for themselves go and work for Reefer Man. He worked for Reefer Man. He met this guy. I forget his name. I'll think of it in a second. But he was CIA, and he hired him to grow weed for him in Mexico for the Sinaloa cartel. So he went to Mexico and started growing weed for the Sinaloa cartel. Great weed. It looked like the old Canadian beasters that they were smuggling down from Canada to the States during the 90s. When he went there, the Sinaloa brought a guy out and shot him in the head in front of Reefer Man and said, "This is what we do to informants." And so that was his introduction. After about working a year or 2 years or so for the Sinaloa, the guy, his contact there, who he was working with, came to him and said that everyone was going to be arrested tomorrow, so you need to get out of there. So Reefer Man managed to escape, but there was an American group that was working with the Sinaloa from Washington State, bringing weed into the States and selling it into the States. They all went to jail, but Reefer Man made it out. The guy who gave Reefer Man the information was killed for giving that information to the Reefer Man, because the CIA guy wanted to get control out of the Reefer Man's genetics. It's all about genetics nowadays and control of genetics. And he met that guy at Hortifarm at Skunk Man's lab. When he came back, he told the Skunk Man what happened. He said, "Hey, he was one of the people that were here, and it was your own decision to go and work with him." He sort of backed his way out of it, but the reality is that he introduced them to him. Right? The every year at the Amsterdam Cup, they would have a party that the Skunk Man would throw at a Lebanese restaurant, and they would invite people to the party, and they would make everybody smoked. I took a puff of a pipe that they had for that occasion, and basically a lot of the people there were narcs, undercover. And now they could get high, so they can get smoke with you. You think if he's smoking, he must be cool, right? Yeah, he's smoking for you because he's allowed to, so he can bust your ass. And that's what the Skunk Man did. He when you think about how many arrests the Skunk Man has led to, I don't think you can count high enough. I mean, you'd be there for a while counting, because he turned on everybody. He even sold mailing lists from the companies that were doing legitimate businesses there. All the seed companies sold their mailing list to Skunk Man. Well, why not? I'm making money on selling seeds. Why not take that 10,000 for the list? No, why not take 50,000 for your mailing list? Of Amsterdam, the Dutch are the most corrupted people on the planet.
Yeah.
But the Skunk Man was integral. He was the most important figure on that scene. They busted the Skunk Man and at Hortifarm, and they found 100 pounds of oil and weed and everything there. And his license had been expired, right? And so they were going to arrest him. He made one phone call one phone call, and they said, look, we're sorry, we made a mess, get your license in order, and they left.
Okay, so it's interesting.
That's the kind of pull that cat had.
Yeah, no doubt.
That's the
It's
kind of
interesting to find out he was straight police from the start, because
he was straight police.
that's fucked up, man.
That's fucked up, man. Straight police. So was Robert Connolly Clark.
And what about Ed Rosenthal?
So was Ben Dronkers. Ben Dronkers works for the police.
And so
He
that's
works
Yeah.
for the
kind of makes
Skunkman.
me, I was going to ask you that. So it kind of makes me want to know, who is the Sam the Skunk Man right now? Because apparently he's supposed to be
I've got my idea for sure.
right. So we want to ask you though, Joe, what you think, because this operation never ended clearly. So who is 2020?
Well, he still is the Skunk Man.
Right, but I'm saying there's got to be the tentacles of the DEA have got their grip already. So we want to know, who are the plants now, because there's got to be plenty of them.
Well, there's plenty of them, but I don't know it, because the only one that I knew and I called out was Robert Connolly Clark and David Watson, the Skunk Man.
Can I ask you this, Joe? Do you subscribe to the sort of common story that he put out, that he deliberately bred the skunk out of the original skunks? Because as you say, Sam the Skunk Man's the biggest misnomer, if ever there was one, because if he did do what he says, then he totally ruined the original skunks. So do you think, A, that he did do that? And B, why do you think he did it? Because I've got a theory on these as well.
Well, it boils down to this. It's generational. What he told two decades ago isn't what he's telling today. So I don't believe anything that the Skunk Man says. I think that those seeds came out of the laboratory of the University of Mississippi, and that a lot of the shit that he says is just basically not true. But he is a scientist and he has worked with the genetics, so maybe he. Well, okay, I'll answer it this way. How did the Skunk Man water down the original skunk? Because he told everybody to be breeding he taught everybody how to breed, so he had everybody breed into their skunk weed. He taught everybody what to do, what to breed, what to do. So right now, when you make your own strain, they taught everybody how to make their own strain and call it after themselves. So you got, strains out on the street that are known by 100, 200 different names, because everybody has been breeding back and forth, right? But it's basically, like Gorilla Glue. Gorilla Glue got bred into just about everything. The cheese plant, the original. I have a picture of the original cheese plant, and the cutting from that, a clone from that, was sold to the Big Buddha cheese for 120,000 euro, and then he went on to create Big Buddha cheese.
Yeah.
That plant, I have a picture of it. It's like no other weed you've ever seen.
Well, I think I've seen that
the
picture.
calyxes were as big as your hand.
Yeah. Was it ever debated about whether or not that was a real picture?
No.
Okay, because I mean, that's what Blue Skies had said, that someone that it was said to not have been a real picture. So I don't know.
No, the picture was real, but it wasn't cheese. There was a big thing about it on the forums when it was like out, I guess, I don't know, a long time ago, at least 15 years ago. And they said that's not cheese. It certainly don't look like any cheese I've ever seen either. And I mean, I've seen the real Exodus Luton cheese that Big Buddha used in his cheese seeds. But
well, he used
in any case, the reason I brought it up is it's obviously skunk number one is nothing at all like skunk. The skunk one that was made after 1985 is nothing like the original skunk. So where it is so vastly different,
and people have bred that out.
Was there a reason? Because I believe, like Sam, being the Fed that he is, and the way I think the old skunks were much, much more medicinal and of medicinal value than skunk number 1 became and is.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I think that he bred, if it's true that he did do that, I believe he would have done that deliberately for the pharmaceutical industry, who were making a fortune off cancer treatment rather than prevention. So cancer being the huge industry that it is now, when somebody had the original old school skunks from the 70s, I believe they were far more, it's obviously just high THC now will kill tumors without doubt. But I think the broad spectrum of cannabinoids and terpenes that existed in the old school skunks, I think they were far more probably potent at treating cancer, for example. So I think Sam probably, if he did do that, if he did breed it to become this sweet, mediocre, low potency crap it is today, that would have been one of the reasons to destroy its medical values as well.
Oh, that's what he'd been doing. That's what he'd been doing all along. And
Yeah.
not just with skunk, with everything else. With everything else. But the skunk was such a odorous. It was such a strong smell. There was no way that you could mask it. If you triple sealed it, right, and say you had a room full of weed, and you opened up one bag, the rest of the bags in the room would all smell like that skunk. You'd have to take alcohol and clean off all the bags. That's how pungent that stuff was. It was incredible stuff. It was Afghani, incredible stuff. You got to remember one thing, buddy, is that all the strains prior to 1940, right, were landrace strains, were bred for medical purposes. They were bred for their medical, what they did medically. Like I have 2 strains. One that they're the Energizer bunnies. I give them to people who have neurological diseases, Parkinson's, MS, any kind of neurological diseases. I have one that is the Energizer bunny that take one hit, you're off to the races. You're focused again. You got that energy. I had one MS patient said, "This is the first time I felt my legs in 3 weeks." Things like that happen. But then I have the same effect, but it has the energy, appetite suppressant. You get the same effect with an appetite suppressant or with one that'll give you the munchies. So it's good. One that gives you the munchies is good for cancer people for people who are cancer people. For people who need to gain weight, they'll take the one that gives you the munchies. The ones who want to lose weight and still have the medical effect, they use the one that has the appetite suppressant. But basically, the high is the same. See, there was a strain in Jamaica that was really for brought down your blood pressure immensely. Yeah. I lost that strain. I wish I had it now. But if you went back in time, all the strains were created for effect.
Yeah.
Medical effect. There was no get high. There was no hippie scene. People used it recreationally, of course, but people used it as medicine. It was always considered medicine. It was never considered something that you could party with or get high or have fun with. It wasn't a recreational aspect. It didn't have a recreational a reputation. It had a medical reputation. So there's that thing, But the Skunkman, you get laid right on his doorstep. He's the one that fucked everything, all the genetics up, and in his quest to separate the medical DNA, the medical aspects of cannabis, separate that out, and just leave THC in the weed. If you notice, there's weed now. There's no cannabinoid profile, no terpenes. It's just pure THC. Yeah. I call it stupid weed. You take a hit and you're locked on your couch. You can't work. If you take it too much, if you eat it in an edible, it takes away your your muscle function. You can't function. You know what I mean? It's stupid weed. The weed that we grew up with was the Energizer bunny. You took one hit, you were off to the races. It created music, art. It was the 60s. 60s, we weren't smoking dumb weed.
No, I agree. I hate modern cannabis of the last 20 years.
Cannabis sucks.
It's absolute dog shit. I call it
Dog
triple
shit,
H
dog
week,
shit.
half-hour highs. I don't even find it barely has much of an effect these days beyond just boredom. You look
Yeah,
at
but I
joint
only
you're
grow
smoking
I
and think,
only
why the
grow
fuck am I
medical.
smoking this?
I only grow landrace races and races.
Have you
and I
ever
only-
heard of a guy called Old Timer One, Joe?
No,
No. No, he's
no, because
unfortunately
I've
just
been off.
passed
I've been
on Saturday.
off the internet for a long time, and I fought a wiki war with the Dutch, which I won several times, but they keep coming back at me. They have people there sitting there on computers, just paid to attack you, to attack information. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
definitely.
I mean,
I've-
look at the ice water method. Mila and GW had a scientist write a paper as if she invented ice water method. Actually, she was under contract to Reinhard Delp, who did have a method patent on the ice water method. It ran out on the ice water method, and she was under contract to him, and she just ripped him off and came out with a 2-bag kit.
Okay.
And then they've been adding bags to that original kit. George Cervantes, a piece of shit. George Cervantes, man. Hold on one second. Yo. Okay, I'm gonna have. I'll be right down. We're gonna have to end this. I've got to go.
Okay, Joe.
Listen, we need to do this.
When
there's
can
a
you
lot of-
record again?
I'll call you again as soon as I can, and then we'll finish this one because there's a lot of information I haven't gotten.
Okay, so we'll just hold on to this one as part 1 then.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Joe.
Thanks,
you.
Joe.
Thank you. Yeah, nice to talk to you.
Yeah, we'll talk.
Nice to meet you too, Joe. Thank you very much.
All right, bye.